Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. Thank you for joining us on the show today. For those of you who are new to the show, maybe you want to know a little bit about what the show's all about. Well, the show is all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an appropriate organisational culture where security is truly valued. Where does it all kick off? Well, it started about 6 years ago when I decided to commit myself to doing research into the human factor. And a significant part of that research resulted in me having this aha moment where I was like, do you know what? The challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture are not unique to cybersecurity. In fact, the challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture are pretty common across all ranges of industries, all aspects of life. And with that in mind, I decided that it was probably a good idea to engage with people who specialise in those different aspects of awareness, behaviour and culture, either from an academic, research-driven background or from a practitioner's background, or maybe ideally they combine the both, and engage with those people and give them a reason to come on the show and to share their insights, their experiences with the community that we're building here at Rethinking the Human Factor. So that's what the show is all about. We're now in series 2, and one of the formats that we've running with is that we basically invite 3 people from outside the security industry to come and share with us their insights. And then we ask one of our listeners to come and share their insights, what they've learned from the show in the past 3 episodes, and also to share with us their experience of addressing the challenges within organizations that they work for around awareness, behavior and culture. Now, if you want to come on the show, if you're a listener and you've been listening for a while and you want to come on the show, you really want to contribute to the discussion, and you are currently working within an organization, whether as a CISO, an education awareness manager, or some form of information security professional, then we'd love to have you on the show. Best way to get in contact with us and to let us know you'd like to come on the show is to drop us an email at podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So let me just repeat that for you. podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So yeah, drop us an email and let us know if you'd like to come on the show. Drop us an email and just let us know if you're really enjoying the show. We get some great feedback. I mean, I've been in London today. I've met a number of people and people really, really do enjoy the show, but just drop us an email and let us know, especially if you're from further afield. I don't get a great deal of opportunity to get out to, for example, North America or Australia or around Europe. Actually, currently, I seem to have stopped my travels for the time being. So yeah, let us know if you're enjoying the show. So what have we got for you today? Well, one of the things which has routinely come up in conversations I've had with people around security over the years, whether it be vendors or security professionals within organizations, is the potential or the importance of using comedy and laughter as an emotion to engage with people. And with that in mind, I did some of my own research into this, but I thought, do you know what? It'd be great to get somebody whose life is all about trying to leverage comedy. It's somebody who is funny, somebody who can share with us some insights that they've gained from their experience of being a comedian. And with that in mind, what I did is I reached out to somebody I've known for a number of years, Bennett Arron, and I asked him if he'd be able to come on the show. And do you know what? Wow, he bit my hand off. And so here it is. Without further ado, let's get on with the interview. Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here on the show. Anyway, so today's guest is somebody that I met a number of years ago when I was kicking off the Analogies project. And I can't exactly remember how we ended up talking, but we did end up talking, and we've met a number of times since. And it's been great to see their progress in terms of bringing their own means of raising awareness around, in this case, identity theft to audiences throughout the whole of the UK, and I do believe further afield as well. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Bennett Arron. Hi, Bennett.
Hello. Bennett can't be here, unfortunately, so I'm taking his place.
Excellent. So that would be some form of identity theft, was it?
That's an identity theft piece of humour.
Okay, right.
Just to explain.
Thank you. Right, everybody. Great to have you on your show. Thank you very much for taking the time out to come and have a chat with us. So, do you remember how it was that we actually met?
Oh, do you know what? I was so hoping you weren't going to ask me. No.
Comics.
What?
You wrote an analogy for the Analogies project, and it related to
superheroes. Yeah,
was it.
But we'd met prior to that, surely.
We must have done. Yeah. I tell you what, it probably involved a drink.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we can't remember. So, okay, for those of you who don't know who Bennett is, Bennett, do you just want to sort of tell us who you are and I guess the journey you've been on?
Okay. Well, my name is Bennett Arron. I'm a Welsh comedian, I guess. I started off as a writer for TV, sketch writing, then started doing stand-up comedy, and I was the runner-up in the BBC New Comedy Awards in 1997 with Peter Kay and some other people. And so I've been a comedian for about 20 years, go around the country doing comedy. And then I also do talks about identity theft because about 20 years ago, I had my identity stolen and lost everything as a result of the crime. And my wife and I became penniless and homeless. Then I wrote a show about it, and that led to a Channel 4 documentary in which I stole the identity of the Home Secretary and was arrested in a dawn raid by Scotland Yard. So I think that probably sums up everything in the last 20 years.
That's a really quick... I just can't summarise that well.
There we go.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, right. So you had that career in comedy, and then you had this moment, which was 20 years ago, which for a lot of the people actually listening on the show, they may not have even been working within information security and privacy at the time.
Most of them probably weren't born, to be honest.
Yes, there is the potential for that as well.
Yeah.
So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about that experience of identity theft? And
yeah. Well, this was, believe it or not, pre-internet. If you can imagine such a time.
Yes.
And so what happened was we were buying a house and everything was going fine and no problems at all. And then a couple of months in, I suddenly had a letter from the bank telling me that they're stopping the mortgage because they discovered all these outstanding debts I had. Didn't know what they were talking about. Had never been in debt, looked into it. And for the previous year and a half, somebody had opened accounts in my name and rung up thousands of pounds worth of debt in my name, which meant I had a 0 credit rating. And for the next 2 years, I was frozen, couldn't do anything, couldn't get a credit card, couldn't open a bank account. And it took me just over 2 years to clear my name. And during that time, we literally lost everything. I was spending every minute of every day trying to clear my name. I wasn't able to work. No money was coming in. The money we'd saved up as a deposit for the house we were using for day-to-day expenses, and before we realized it, we had nothing left. And my wife was pregnant at the time, and we had to move out, and we had to move in with my parents. And it was it was, I still think about it almost on a daily basis. It just was the most devastating of things to have happened to us.
Right, and I was having a chat with another guest on the show who, I'm sure there's no problem mentioning his name, but he's from the Nationwide. He's responsible for their education and awareness program. And before we actually got into the actual interview, but we were sort of talking about experiences and the importance of, I was talking about an experience I had as somebody that I know who had, their details had been compromised and it included their credit card information. And it had the type of impact that most people just don't understand. And I still remember, because I remember having this chat with this person and it was over a pint. And I still remember the raw emotion that was in that conversation. And when I was sort of relaying that to Craig from Nationwide, he got it. He was like, he could fit, I just know that he really bought into it. He said, that is just one of the most emotional stories I've ever heard about, cyber, and how when it goes wrong, it can really, really go horribly wrong.
Yeah, people don't realize the impact that it can have on your life. I mean, this happened to me 20 years ago. It still impacts my life today. And when it happened to me, at least now people know about fraud and identity theft. When it happened to me, nobody knew about it. I mean, it later transpired that I was the first major victim of the crime in the UK, which I didn't know at the time. But it took all my time to convince the companies, the banks, the police that I was me and not the person pretending to be me.
Yeah. And how has that helped you do what you do now? And probably a good idea for the listeners is to understand what is that. It's almost like it's a bit of a mission for you. And I know that you've used the word cathartic.
Cathartic, yeah.
Cathartic, with that sense that you've used this and the energy, almost like the raw energy, negative energy, and you've flipped it and you've then used it to move on as best you can. So do you just want to explain to listeners what it is that you're doing? Because I have no shame in admitting this to all my listeners. One of the reasons why I've got Bennett here is, other than that, it's always good to have a chat with him. Okay. And we're going to talk about the power of humour, which is something that he leverages, is that he does some great work around education and awareness. And, he's there for you to go and have a chat with and leverage and get involved in the work you're doing. So I've got no shame in making people aware of that. Do you want to just let people know what it is you do and how that experience has sort of, I guess it's giving you that passion, that energy to go and do it?
Yeah, I mean, I speak a lot at conferences. I'm a keynote speaker in different expos and conferences. In fact, I went over to Australia. I was flown over, which was lovely, just for 4 days.
Oh, right, okay.
Which was mad, to be the opening keynote speaker at a big conference they had there for about, 2,000 people or something, which was great, although I managed to have, I think, an hour and a quarter to sleep before I went on.
Yeah.
But it went very well. And then they asked me, fun enough, to be part of they had a big entertainment thing that evening, and I just did some normal stand-up. So I do conferences, and I also, in the last couple of years, I've gone around companies speaking to staff and management about fraud, identity theft, about the way it can happen, about the impact it can happen on you and on the companies for which you work. And nowadays, I also mentioned GDPR in it. And the thing that people have mentioned is, and I must have done this talk, I don't know how many thousands of times, is that there are moments in the talk, quite a few moments, where all the emotion and memory comes back from the time that it happened, when you feel so powerless. There's absolutely nothing you can do. And when you're fighting against people who don't believe you, and when you see what the consequences are, and those emotions just come back. And I think that comes across in the talk. And what's very, very good about it is that obviously it's a warning to people, but I'd like to think it's done it in a humorous way. I get both, because it's funny and yet the point comes across. And the number of people that have contacted me afterwards from these companies, just staff and what have you, saying if it hadn't been for my talk, they might have clicked on this link. They might have done this. They might have unexpectedly given this information over. But because of what I tell them in the talk, that's something that makes them more aware of it. And it really does hit home. And I also, that little shopping centre scam, I think you've seen it.
Oh, I've seen that, yeah. It's great.
I showed that at the talk. I mean, for those who haven't seen it, it's online. If you look at Bennett Arron shopping centre scam, I literally set up a little shopping stall in South Wales in a shopping centre, and I say to people, I can stop you from having your identity stolen if you give me all your personal information. And there's like a queue of people giving me everything, their mother's maiden name, their PINs, the 3 numbers on the back of their cards, their account numbers, without even realizing what they're doing. And that's another thing, that people are just shocked at what they fall for when they think that they're actually defending themselves. So this is what I do, really.
Okay. So going back to that emotional piece, you're saying that it doesn't matter how many times you tell the story, there are always certain points in the story where the emotion sort of, it comes up from within you. It's almost like a scar inside,
yeah,
which acts as an anchor. So as soon as you move to that topic, the anchor, it then digs deep and pulls at the scar, and then this bad emotion that comes up. This very negative emotion comes out, and then that is what comes out through your mouth, and I suspect your body language as well.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure. There really are. I mean, there are moments when I haven't cried, but I could feel myself, welling up inside. And I have had people in the audience, it's quite weird, it's happened a few times, where they've been crying, and then 10 minutes later, they're crying from laughter. And that type of switch, I love. I mean, the fact that I can get those, not that I intentionally go out to get people crying, but the fact that the story is funny and yet really hard-hitting and emotional is, I guess, why I do it so often, and I book to do it so often.
Right. So I listen to you talk there. The things that come across is, we often talk within information security, and specifically those who are responsible for education and awareness and trying to influence behaviour, that emotion is one of the biggest drivers of behaviour and choices. And I'm just listening to you there, and I'm thinking there's the emotion that comes from you as a person that's experienced it, and then there's the emotion which is stirred amongst the audience. I mean, you just mentioned there, people actually crying. And then, with humour, it's emotion again, I guess, in the sense that, and it causes people to cry. And it's also, there's two levels of how you can drive emotion there. There's the emotion that the actual audience receives through whatever the mechanism. In your case, it's, Bennett, he's on stage, he's telling the story, and the audience are listening to it, and they're getting emotional. And you just said, there are people that have got in contact with you afterwards, and it's clearly made a difference to them. So there's emotion that's working with them, but then there's emotion that comes from you about talking about it. Or if you weren't talking, then you were about writing. Have you actually written anything actually in relation to this?
I wrote a book called Heard the One About Identity Theft, which again, talking about, cathartic reasons for doing it. This was a way of getting everything sort of out of me. And so I could, yes, I share it on stage, but there's, it's a long story. And I obviously can't tell the whole thing on stage. And I just wanted to get it down on paper, really. And what was interesting, my kids knew a bit about the story. They did know the whole thing. They weren't born at the time when it first happened. So it was incredible for them to read the whole thing about what had happened to their parents. And the feedback I've had from the book has been fantastic. It's doing incredibly well on Amazon. When I do talks, I sell them after the talks. Sometimes companies buy them and I sign them, and they put their own little leaflets and what have you in them. But the feedback I've had from the book has been incredible, really.
Yeah.
Just people knowing how easily this happened. And then, of course, I talk about the consequences of making the documentary and what happened with the Home Secretary and with the arrest and everything. Yeah. So the book's sort of in three parts, I guess, that, what happened before, what happened then, and what happened after I made the documentary. So, yes, the feedback, it was very high up. I think it was in the top 10 books under the category of real crime and fraud, something. I don't know what the category is on Amazon. But anyway, it's doing well.
Okay. So I think, the things that I'm getting inspired here, it's this thing with emotion, because often, like I mentioned earlier, often we talk about using emotion to drive a message back home to influence behaviours. And there's these two elements to emotion. I think for the listeners, the thing that I pick out straight away here is trying to stir emotion in your audience is one thing. Being emotional yourself helps with that.
Yeah. It does, yes.
It makes a big difference. So I'm just going to highlight that, because when we talk about, I think people see emotion in this almost like it's a 2D type of phrase, in the sense that you're only looking at emotion in terms of the audience. But I think what's really important here is it's almost like marginal gain, in the sense that, well, actually, emotion is part of the process of even coming up with the content. However you're going to communicate it to your audience, it's going to be much more effective if the person that's writing it has some sort of emotional investment in it. So, yeah, that's a really interesting point, that you can maximize it by having emotion in terms of how you write it and how you deliver it. And it's not just about stimulating emotion amongst your audience.
Sure. I remember when I first made the documentary, for example, and I write about this in the book, I sat there on my own watching the first edit of it, with my talking about what had happened to me and then the different things. And I'll never forget, and I sat there in this little edit room, and I don't think I've ever cried so much, just because, it had been such an emotional thing to make and recall. And then seeing this sort of finished product was just, and knowing that what I was doing would help people. And I think that's a lot of the time. I mean, yes, I get paid to talk, but a lot of the time what I do, I feel that I'm helping people. I'm stopping it from happening to them. I mean, look, because of the documentary I made, because of what I found out, I found a loophole in the driving license application form, which allowed me to steal the identity of the Home Secretary, and pointed this out to the Home Office and said, look, this is here, and instead of them giving me an OB, I was arrested. But I said that this is it. So because of that, all the driving license application forms had to be reprinted. So they had to throw away all the ones they'd done and reprint however millions again, because of the loophole I had found. So at least I feel that I've stopped people from having identity theft done to them in that way because I managed to get that loophole closed. So I feel pretty proud of that, really.
Yeah. And, in your case, you were doing it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
But, other people might have been exploiting that loophole for another reason, and they're doing it from a more a criminal, malicious perspective. In a way, you were doing an awareness activity.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was doing. I mean, it's funny because the person who stole my identity, I tracked down and gave the name and address to the police, and nothing was done. Mind you, it's only been 20 years, so any day now, I reckon. But when I did this, I got arrested for pointing out a loophole to stop other people from doing it as a criminal act, and I got arrested. So you tell me if that's justice.
Yes. Well, one man's justice or one person's justice is another person's. Fill the gap. Right. So, humour. So when I mentioned about humour, the other reason why I sort of reached out to you is that it's I guess it's a common belief that humour is a very valuable tool when it comes to engaging with people, and that engagement is that first step in the process of trying to influence behaviour. How much truth is there in that? That that humour is it an all-powerful tool? Is it a Jedi trick? Or do you think that it's like, yeah, it does this and it's great at this? You always need to be cognizant of the fact that, there are suitable times to be funny, and in fact, sometimes I do wonder, somebody's funny in the most awkward of moments, and you're like, is this the right time for it? Some people get it, some people don't. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what I find is that humour breaks down barriers. For example, halfway through my talk, I will usually ask if somebody's been arrested. Now, I've noticed if I ask that question a bit too early, I won't get a response. If I ask it later, after people have been laughing and relaxed, and I ask it, usually 9 times out of 10, I'll have at least 2 people admit to having been arrested, usually to the shock of their
colleagues,
co-workers.
Yeah.
In fact, I do know one person, and I won't say what company, who admitted, a very senior person who admitted to being arrested, to the absolute shock of their co-workers and employees, and left the company the next day.
Right.
Because nobody had known. And it was quite a serious thing, and something they should never have said, and was very unpleasant. And admitted to what they had done, and therefore had to leave the company.
Right.
So if that hadn't come straight off the back of me having made them laugh, he probably wouldn't have admitted to it. So humour does break down barriers. Humour brings you a warmth and brings you in and makes it more conducive to listening and understanding a talk, because it's a roller coaster of emotion, really, because you're upset, then you're angry, then you're laughing, and you suddenly you don't know where you are emotionally, and that I find interesting, and I find I use that tool quite a lot.
So with humour, do you think it's something that people naturally have, or is it something that people have to work on and they develop? Is there a process within that? Or, are there sort of, I think back to the magic circle, and like these are, there are processes. You look at magic and you go, wow, okay. And you're like, well, how did that happen? Well, actually, there are sort of key processes which are more likely to make a trick actually wowish, if you want to think of it that way, if wow was a metric.
Yes.
With humour, are there things, underlying processes which are more likely to make something funny? I mean, and then you combine it obviously with the talents of the individual.
A lot of comedians, a lot of the ones that I work with, when they first started, myself included probably, were not necessarily that funny. I mean, some start off very funny, but a lot don't. It takes, I think, about 7 years to find your voice as a comedian. Years and years and years ago, I after I'd left drama school, I started a comedy club, and I used to bizarrely audition people in this comedy. It's something you'd never do now, but I auditioned people. I used to have people like Paul Merton to come. I was very young at the time. I had people like Paul Merton and Joe Brandt for, I remember, £30 a gig to come and do this new club I'd started.
Yeah.
And I remember one young guy came up and he auditioned for me, and he meant to do 5 minutes. Anyway, after 3 minutes, I stopped him and I said, look, I'm not being rude. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. I said, it's just not fun. There's nothing in it. It's just nonsense. And he went, okay. I said, so, I can't book you. And that was Eddie Izzard. So,
right.
But then a lot of people say that when he first started, just wasn't that funny. Yeah. Because he hadn't found. Lee Evans also couldn't get booked for gigs because nobody got it. And then you sort of find your voice and you find what makes you funny and what the audience likes. And that's it. So a lot of people, I think you have to have an inherent sense of humor that you can bring out. But then I know people who have no sense of humor at all. And it doesn't matter how many years they'll be doing it. They just will never be funny. Yeah. Nice people, but no sense of humor. Incapable of saying anything humorous.
Right. Find your voice. Yeah, I like that saying. Finding your voice. So taking about 7 years to find your voice. And the examples you gave, where you're sat there, you're one person, but you're an audience. But the audience could have just as easily been, a room full of a couple of hundred people. Mm-hmm. So there's finding your voice, and then you mentioned there about the audience as well. How important do you think it is, or how relevant do you think it is that finding your voice is almost done? Is it just your voice, or is it a voice that is almost on time, i.e. it's the right time for that voice because of maybe things that are going on outside in the world?
There is an aspect to that, but I think that's probably more material in a way. I mean, I used to play some comedy clubs, and I remember writing material and thinking to myself, oh, I think that's funny, but that audience in that club won't laugh, so I didn't do it. And now I've changed, whereby I think to myself, I think this is funny. If they don't laugh, then that's their problem, because I think this is good. Yeah. And when it comes to these identity theft talks, I've also found my voice in that, if you like, because I found a way of putting across a story and warning people, but in a humorous and, I've been told, very appealing manner. I mean, it must be, one company booked me for 40 talks, so I must be doing something right. So I like the fact that I found my voice there, that I found a market. I mean, at the moment, I'm the only, comedian identity theft speaker around. I hope it stays like that for a long time.
I wonder why.
Yes, I don't want anybody else cashing in on it, thanks. Yeah. So, and it's nice. It's nice that I'm booked for that. And the talks that I do and the expos that I speak at and the conferences around the world that I speak at is because, I have a story that people haven't heard before. It's also a warning, and it's also a piece of entertainment that people leave. And usually when I do conferences, I'm the last speaker of the day, because they found either the opening keynote speaker or the last one, because they found that people leave the conference and then start going and having drinks and chatting and networking with my story in their mind. And that's a starting point for them. And I've heard people go, oh, my God, that was incredible, or that was funny, or that was heartbreaking, or whatever. And it gets people talking. So that works quite well.
Yeah. So, going back, I'll get to the question that I raised, the sense of, you were talking about, maybe the content is more a reflection of what's going on in people's lives outside of the room. Finding your voice, the voice is the way that you're delivering it. It's a phrase a marketeer might use is something like tone of voice, which sounds like it should be the same, but there'll be something very missing from it. The marketeer will be seeing it almost like tone of voice is, how you say something, whether it be in written words or you say it verbally. And that's an important, the whole finding your voice piece is an important piece to actually delivering content. So, and then your content has to be really tailored towards the audience. So sort of in your experience in the early days, you were writing material, content for the audience, but now it's got to the point where, now this is interesting, now you got to the point where you write because you like it, yeah?
Yes, I do something now because I want to say it. It's important for me to say. I mean, when I first started, my set was all one-liners and puns and things like that, which, I still put in now and then, but it's not as relevant to who I am anymore. Right. And it doesn't really say anything I want to say. I mean, I'm not political on stage. I am in my writing and articles, and I can be a bit on social media, but I'm not political on stage unless it's something that's really, really bothered me, and then I can be. But tone of voice is literally, to me, it's literally either the tone of your voice in so much as the emphasis in your voice, where you show that things are more important, and also the tone of the subject matter, whether it's light in tone and darker in tone. And that's why with my talks, there is a real change in that tone. If you're doing a graph, a black and white graph, you would see where the lightness and the darkness and the shades all mix as I go through it. So tone is quite an important factor.
So you've got the whole concept of variation in terms of the tone when you're engaging with audience as well to help. It's almost, and it goes back to the point you were saying earlier, you're balancing people's emotions and you're trying to stir them up so that you get them to a point where they don't really know where they are emotionally. Yeah. Is that a susceptible point? Is that seen as a point of weakness, or is that a point of opportunity in the sense that at that point they're probably at the barriers have really fallen down?
Yeah, at those points, it's what's lovely about it is that they're completely on my side. When I show the sort of, the injustice of what happened and how apart from having all this happening to me, it was all the obstacles that I had to try and overcome. So as well as having this burden, as well as having this upset, as well as having no money, as well as having my wife pregnant and living with my parents and all this, I was still fighting against obstacles with banks and authorities that I shouldn't have had to do. So there was nobody there to help me. And people do really empathize with that. So they really come on the journey with me, which is lovely. And then they're laughing along with me when there's something humorous happening. And what's interesting, talking about tone, I also help a lot of people are nervous about speaking in front of, companies, in front of staff, what have you. So I work alongside a lot of CEOs and what have you, helping them writing their speeches and helping them to deliver what they have to do, and explaining to them how tone is important in that, and how they need to find their own voice and not just reading out from a piece of paper, which anybody could do. So these things really work well together.
I think it's really, really important. One of the challenges that I think probably a lot of our listeners have is that who are responsible for education awareness is that often, we generally get really excited about trying to adopt communication techniques, whatever it is, which are more engaging with the audience. And so, you get into that whole concept of tone. But then we hit corporate guidelines.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's can't really go that far with that. We can't be juggling all these emotions. It's got to be straight and clear and to the point. And there is an argument for that. People talk about, well, just make it really simple. And a lot of the behavioural work that I've done has been, you just need to make it easy and easy, simple type thing. But then you talk to people like yourself who do have this, experience of lifting people and letting people sort of, and then bringing them down, moving to the sides, etc., and moving people's emotions all around, who then, have the experience that this does really work. And I was just wondering, do you find that people ask you to get involved with their efforts to sort of raise awareness amongst audiences because comedy doesn't really fall under the corporate guidelines, does it? I mean, the events that you do are they subject to corporate guidelines?
Well, I mean, there's no rule saying this piece of information can't be given across in a humorous manner. So, there's no problem. When I do, when I talk about GDPR, for example, nobody's expecting that to be in any way amusing or light because it's not a funny subject. Yet I have found a way of doing it in a humorous way and a way that people remember it, because nobody wants to sit there and listen to facts and see the spreadsheets and see this and be told off. Everybody remembers being in school, and your immediate thing is going, I want to break the rules. Of course you don't, because you lose your job, the company can lose millions. Yeah. But your initial response is to rebel. That's what people want to do. So to be told something, you mustn't do this, as a straight piece of information, it sort of goes over people's head. To be told, shouldn't do this because this and this could happen in a humorous way, I think puts the message across better.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We were saying about we're being told not to do something. We've almost finished agreeing with somebody, another host, guest that's going to come on the show, who specialises in in child psychology, but in a really cool way, in the sense of, how do you get children? How do you manage children's behaviour? How do you sort of, because I know as a parent, I'm like, don't do this, don't do that. You don't, no. Okay. Yeah. And actually then they suddenly like, you listen to these people talking, they're going, yeah, not the right way to do it. And we had somebody on, Susan Weincheck, who's a behavioural specialist from the US, and she was talking about this as well. So we managed to get this person who specialises in child psychology. And the idea is, the team said to me, they go, isn't that a bit young for our audience? The listeners to this podcast, their target audience isn't generally children. Though people will turn and go, yeah, but sometimes they behave like them. And I'm like going, well, we were all children at once, in the defense. But it's interesting from a cultural perspective, all my work around culture, majority of the cultural values we adopt and we have as adults actually came from that period when we were children.
Right, yes.
And a lot of those are the foundations upon which we make choices and decisions. Mm-hmm. And I guess probably choices and decisions even about, potentially what is funny, what isn't funny, and in what context, that type of thing. So, yeah, we're going to have these people on the show to sort of come and talk about it at a really, really young age. I want to ask you a question. Now, I know you're not a neuroscientist, okay?
Oh, okay.
The rumour isn't true,
no.
But I was wondering whether or not, what is it you know about what humour does to us sort of physically, other than, maybe pee ourselves or something, I don't know, have an accident. What does it do? I mean, physically, have you ever understood at any level what it does to people?
Yeah, I did. Well, I'd looked into it once because I found it, I just found it interesting.
Yep.
As to what it affects in the brain and why people want to laugh. And, they say, that the cliche about laughter being the best medicine. And there is an element of truth in this.
Okay.
That laughing can increase, I can't remember what it's called, it'll come to you in a second, but it increases the good aspect, if you like, of things in the body.
Right.
And it can, it's not a cure-all, obviously, but it can make you, apart from making you feel better mentally because you're laughing, physically, it can have an impact as well, which I was amazed at.
Actually, you mentioned about laughter and crying. Now, I only came across this very briefly when I was doing my research, but when people cry, you get to the point where your emotions are at that peak that you cry, and that actually the crying process actually is a way of releasing tension. Mm-hmm. So if it's like a really negative thing, the process of crying is meant to help release stress and tension that's associated. It's like the physical manifestation of the emotion that's inside. And I guess it's probably the same then, by the sounds of it, with comedies. You get to that point where you actually can't laugh anymore. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've got to get rid of it some other way. And the body might very well do that to the process of crying. And serotonin, it's that feel-good factor. And that makes you, I think, from a brain perspective, and I think about the knowledge of that comes with the brain, that's probably going to act as an enabler to sort of make information they're receiving, lessons that you're learning, more sticky and more memorable. Okay, all right. Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, it's one of the sort of the first things children do, if you like, as babies. They laugh from a very, very, very young age because it's a good emotion. And that's one of the first emotions that they have. And even when you think about things like funerals, for example, humor helps to alleviate the upset at a funeral. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to get booked to do stand-up at funerals necessarily, but you have a wake and you have people telling funny stories, and it really helps. It really helps with the grieving process.
Yeah. But at that point in life where I've been to a fair few, and you do get to that point where, the humour is what enables it to pass not more smoothly, but I guess it smooths off the other emotions which are associated with, somebody passing away, and you're having to say, your farewells to them, that sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, another example of how it works.
If you're watching a film, a very emotional film, you will wait, and there's the slightest bit of humor, you will laugh much more than that piece deserves, because you need that emotional outlet.
Yeah.
You're upset and you just need it, which is why, I mean, not that my talk is that extreme, but which is why the talk sort of works, because you're getting involved in a story and you're listening and you're going, oh my gosh, this is quite serious and this could happen to me unless I'm careful. And then you get a chance to laugh and you go, oh, thank God for that. I've got a release of emotion.
Yeah. Can I ask a question about culture and comedy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could take your show on the road across a whole range of different countries, or is your show more? Yeah, do you think there's a cultural sort of potential? There's an impact of the local culture of the audience. If you did a show in Wales, is that same show really going to work in, I don't know, let's say Austria? Or, going further afield, let's think about, South Africa. Because I think cultures, it's important that people understand the role of culture in this, because, there are options now where you can get films and animations, etc., and they string laughter through it, and they try to leverage laughter. And these are deployed on a global basis to audiences all around the world. And I just sometimes wonder, I go, is that really going to work?
Yeah, it's interesting. What's very interesting is the fact that I have gigged in both those places.
Right, okay.
So I can answer. I find my stand-up, in fact, I did these identity theft talks in South Africa and then did a comedy club there. So it was two completely contrasting bits of material, if you like, two completely different sets. And I was pleased that both went down well. I mean, yes, I had to get rid of local references, obviously, and I had to drop anything that had a pun in it. But apart from that, and that was more in Austria, I'd say, than South Africa. But apart from that, humour to an extent is humour. As long as people understand it, as long as people get the references, then it worked fine. In fact, South Africa was lovely. A lot of fun there doing the shows there. And I've done this particular talk. I've done in, Poland, South Africa, Hong Kong, I said Australia. So I've been around the world doing, never the States yet, which it's meant to be happening later this year. So I'm hoping. So humor can travel. You just have to slightly adapt it and drop the references that only a British audience are going to get. And I quite like doing that. I quite like adapting it slightly. Yep. But the story of my identity theft talk does work very well around the world, which is great.
Okay. Right. That's interesting. And I just wonder, from a cultural perspective, we talk about South Africa, Austria, you've got Poland, UK, obviously. How many of those cultures fit a specific sort of cultural profile? I think I'm just wondering if you went over, I mean, you mentioned Hong Kong, actually, which stuck in my mind. Hong Kong, what type of audience were you presenting to there? Were they like a local audience?
50-50, I think, with expats and locals.
Right. Okay. Because I do wonder how, when I've looked at culture and as part of my research, how people respond in different cultures. Because there's almost like the slightly Anglo-Saxonish broader Western cultures. And then you will have, and I've experienced this, we work with clients in the Far East where, there's just a different culture there. And the whole value of respect and authority means that you can't be, having a dig at somebody that's, higher perceived authority, that type of thing.
Yes.
I just wonder, have you ever had an experience of working in that sort of more of an alternative culture to sort of like that Western democratic type of culture? Even though I know South Africa it's probably not into that. I mean, originally a lot of, there's a mixed culture down there, and there is a heavy influence from a Western perspective, especially within certain demographics within that. So have you ever done anything that outside, maybe in the East or even in the Middle East?
I remember I did, the only time I've ever been, I've had a talk to beforehand. Not a warning, but just a be careful you don't do this, was probably in the United Arab Emirates.
Right.
Where they just said, here are some subject matters best to avoid. So I did, because I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
But that's the only, and it wasn't particularly extreme, but it was just, there are going to be some people from this and this in here, so best avoid these subjects, which I did. And, if they're booking me, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I think this chat with you has been absolutely fantastic. And I did, going through it all, I'm like, oh, right. Okay. Okay. I've learned a lot from this. I think the emotion piece is really important. I think, something that aha moment of, there's the audience's emotion, but there's the emotion of the people that are putting the content together and then actually, delivering it as well. Humour as a means of reducing barriers, so that you sort of, and that's important for me. I think from a behavioural perspective, I work a lot in terms of understanding biases that people have that are going on unconsciously within them. And then there's the biases that people have, which are just really just conscious biases. So, people that turn up, I've been dragged along to the Bennett Arron show. Okay. I didn't really want to be here, but when they get there, they enjoy the experience.
That's never happened, Bruce. Nobody's ever been dragged. Nobody's ever said, I don't want to be here. Just don't stop making up stories.
No, I thought for a minute I was going to go, what? It's never happened that somebody's enjoyed the show. I was like, no, I'm sure it has. No, but that sort of thing, people get taken to something and they're sort of not fighting and screaming, but they're reluctant participants in something.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Yeah, and then they get there and they're like, come away going, well, some of them will come away and go, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. And some of them go, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, which to me is just like, you enjoyed it really, didn't you? Yes. And then they go, you just don't want to admit that, do you? And they're like, no, I just didn't enjoy it. So you go, no, you really did enjoy it, didn't you? Yeah. So, okay. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having a show. We'll, for all the listeners, what we'll do in the show notes, we'll provide some links to Bennett's site, also to the shopping centre experiment, which I saw a couple of years ago, and it has been on LinkedIn as well, but that's absolutely great. We'll also put a link in there for Bennett's LinkedIn profile, a link for the LinkedIn profile. And yeah, I mean, is there anything online, actual elements of your show at all, just snippets? You haven't done...
You know what? That's very funny. Yesterday, somebody wanted to book me for something, and they said, is there a clip online? And there isn't a clip online. And the reason I used to have virtually the whole show online. And then what I found was that people were taking that.
Streaming it, yeah.
Instead of booking me. So, but I'm going to have to put a clip up of the talk somewhere. So I'm going to do that in the next couple of days, because a couple of people have asked me just to see, even if it's a 2-minute clip. So I'm going to look to see what I have and try and put something together and put it onto the website. Yeah.
So thanks very much for joining the show, Bennett. I shall let you get back to your day.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
And for all our listeners, I hope that you enjoyed the show. In fact, we know, Bennett's already told us that everybody enjoys the show. So I know you enjoy the show. The next podcast will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And I think that is the podcast where we're going to be talking to these child psychologists around how to help behavioural challenges with children. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to find that interesting as well. In the meantime, thanks you very much, Bennett, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Hi there. I hope you found that really interesting. I really enjoyed speaking to Bennett, and it's no point trying to be funny with Bennett because he'll just shoot you down. Anyway, I took a lot away. I mean, every podcast I do with it, every time I get the great opportunity to speak to a guest, I mean, the number of notes I write it's really quite significant. One thing I'm just going to pull out from that was when Bennett explained that there are a lot of people now that are household names when it comes to comedy, but it's taken them quite some time. And the reason why it's taken them quite some time is he talked about the comedian finding their voice, and that finding their voice enables them to become successful. When I think of voice in that context, I think about, not just the tone of voice that you might have within the context of information security and your communication and how you communicate with people, but also on a face-to-face basis, finding your voice, finding the confidence to be able to talk about things. And that confidence has to come about a sense of knowing and having some certainty about what you're talking about. Like, really, really important. Be certain about what you mean by awareness before you go talking to people about awareness. Be certain about what you mean about behavior before you start going and talking to people about behavior. Be certain what you mean about culture before you actually start going out there and talking about culture. Really, really important things. So if you found that really interesting and you'd like to know how you can be kept abreast of the new podcasts that are coming out, but also anything that we're doing here at Marmalade Box and the Rethinking Human Factor, then how can you best do that? If it's a podcast you're really interested in, then what I suggest is you subscribe either via the podcast player that you're using or via the Marmalade Box /podcast subscription service, or you can keep abreast of what we're doing by joining the LinkedIn Rethinking the Human Factor group. And we make the group aware of all the podcasts that are coming out. We make them well aware of that in advance, but also stuff that we're seeing that we think is really interesting, not just our own stuff, but other people's stuff as well. We're keen to be able to help share the sort of what we're seeing that's going on now that we think is relevant to the discussion around the human factor. So yeah, you can join the LinkedIn group. Alternatively, you can go to the Marmalade Box website and you can register to be kept informed of what we're up to, things that will be of interest to anybody working on awareness, behavior and culture within the security context. Right, so what's the next podcast? Well, the next podcast is we've got a guest coming on, and that guest is going to be sharing with us their experience, what they've learned from the previous 3 podcasts, but also their own experience of education and awareness, behavior and culture within the organizations that they've worked in. And they will be on in about 2 weeks' time. So it's been great having you on the show. It's always good to have people coming back. If you like the show, then you can drop us an email. Just let us know. It's always great for the team to know that, all their efforts are meaning something to people and that they're actually helping people rethink the human factor. And you can do that at the email address podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Thanks very much for joining us. And I hope to be speaking with you soon. Take care.